Katie Fujihara. Welcome to the workout. I'm so good chatting with you today.
Thank you for having me. So excited to be on here.
Well, I'm excited to be learning more about your career because you had a very interesting set of transitions that I am curious to
Yes.
learn more about. I've heard about your work and we've chatted before, but what's the best way to learn about somebody than actually have that person speak? So maybe you can talk to us about what are you doing these days and what was the origin story of your career in engineering?
Yeah, so, the origin story is that I had never even considered tech or STEM or anything like that as a career option for myself, dating back all the way for my whole life up until a few years ago. I was never really that person who was good at math and science, nor had an interest really. And so because of that, I kind of ruled out the tech industry and STEM type of subjects as a career option. But, you know, I'm from Hawaii. I graduated with a degree in marketing and Japanese, thought I was going to go into localization and but on a whim, moved to San Francisco because I just wanted a change of pace and, you know, kind of fell into these startup type of environments as customer support and realized this is interesting and this is something that I've never really known to exist, especially coming from Hawaii. We don't have a very big startup culture. They're not a big tech culture. So for me, going through school and everything, it was always very traditional. You're gonna work for like old companies or you're gonna work for the government. And so being thrown into this environment, it was a shock at how many different roles exist and all the different types of peoples that are in these roles. And by doing the customer support role, I interacted a lot with engineers at the startup because I just seemed to click with them. And through coffee runs and all these lunches, they eventually convinced me to learn how to code just for fun because they saw that the role I was in wasn't stimulating me enough, and they thought that hey, if you have an interest in learning languages, there's a big tie over with learning how to program. And for that reason, I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. I don't think I'm gonna like it because I don't, in my head, I think of coding, I think of binary. Like I just think of like a bunch. I just picture people doing like 0 1 1 0 like all day long. They're just putting zeros and ones. They have like two keys on their keyboard, and they're like, no, 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 no. It's more like a language. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm interested. So did that, went through a boot camp, moved to Portland. And then I got my first role at Webflow as an apprentice software engineer back in 2019. And, going through all of these different transitions, I kind of always had an idea that for me, software engineering wouldn't be my end goal. It would be more of a stepping stone to get to where I want to be, which I didn't really know where I wanted to be at that point. And now as I kind of transition from to my next thing, I'm thinking more of technical program managing, which appropriate, because I feel like that is something that aligns a lot more with my natural skill sets versus kind of trying to shove myself into this engineering peg. I think that I have, you know, other types of skills that I am more proud of using that I think is more suited for TPM type of roles. So that's where we are today.
Wow, that's been a long journey. I find it interesting that you called out, that you were kind of slightly not considering tech because you were discouraged by kind of the math and science skills, which I think is a unfortunate side effect of probably a lot of the community gatekeeping that exists today, like in the tech scene, where it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
you absolutely have to have a degree in math and computer science to be in success. And I was like, that's all BS. You really don't. Like
Right.
there's kind of, you alluded to it, which is the tech field has a diverse set of roles that require different skill sets. And just because you're good at putting numbers together doesn't necessarily mean you're a good engineer or that you're a good PM or a good designer. And it's kind of disheartening that, in your shoes, kind of you felt that at the time. It's like, oh, just because I'm not good at math, like that means that this is something that I don't want to do.
And I feel like also, when I talk to my peers and all of my childhood friends who are back in Hawaii, and I try to, encourage them to stretch out of their comfort zones and, look for those remote positions or even potentially move and, try tech out, try startups. a lot of them are under this, have this notion that it, even in the roles that they would do, which they're not software engineers, but they are all convinced that they need to know how to code for some reason. Like even to be at a tech company doing something like marketing, they're like, oh, I can't do tech because I don't know how to code and I'm not smart enough to code. And I'm like, one, you're smart enough, but two, like, you don't need to do that for your job. So it's a bunch of smashing all of these preconceived notions for these folks.
So for folks that are listening to this, know that you don't actually need to be good at math and science to be an engineer or a TPM or a PM or a designer. Like there's so much more to it, which is, again, encouraging words, especially knowing that there is just so much work to be done that does not require you to be good at algorithms. Like, sure, if you're working on designing database systems and you're there like into the weeds of all the deep technical stuff, like, yeah, sure, you need to understand like the performance of algos and stuff. But there's so much more to that, like building, I don't know, like if you're building web experience, if you're building mobile applications, if you're building any kind of like APIs, like a lot of the stuff is just, you're never going to touch it. Like thinking back on my even college days, like I had a CS degree, but like the things that I've actually learned in class, like how many of them I'm actually applying day by day is like not a lot, honestly. Like
Right.
they never, like I work in security right now. They never taught me any of this stuff, like zero.
Yeah, and it's always, I feel like, especially when interviewing for software engineer roles, it was always, as a boot camp grad who learned more of like the web development style than like algorithms, it would be very scary to go into these interviews and they're like, okay, leak code, and it's just like, but this is for like a front end position. Like, when am I gonna need to know how to reverse whatever trees and whatever big O? I'm like, what? Like, what is this?
Oh my god, that also speaks to probably like how broken sometimes the interview system is, because you're really kind of, everybody expects that, oh, you're an engineer, sure, here's some lead code and here's some like, give me the like the big, yeah, like I said, like the big O perf assessment of this, and like, okay, but like I'm gonna be building websites, like how is this related? Or somebody building mobile applications, like I'm never gonna be touching any of the stuff you're asking me to do.
Right.
It's fascinating just how the community itself kind of gatekeeps new entrants by these kind of very discouraging perceptions that are often not true at all. I'm curious from your perspective. So you moved to San Francisco, basically. Did you know anybody there? Did you have any connection to the city, or was it just more like
no
impromptu?
Yeah, it's the funniest turn of events, because so I was working as a administrative assistant for this big hotel company in Hawaii, because over there it's kind of, you either go into government or tourism, and so I was kind of going the tourism route, and that was a temporary like contractor type of role, and once it was finished, I was just so over kind of this stiff environment of, oh, I have to dress up and I have to clock in and I have to clock out, and I was looking like 10 years in the future, and it was just like, oh my gosh, I have to climb this ladder starting at this level of faxing and printing papers for other people, and it was just not rewarding. And so, funny enough, I have a few cousins who are doing the startup thing in like LA, and so I was at their dog's funeral in Hawaii.
What a turn of events. Yeah.
Them came back for their dog's funeral, and I was like venting to them about my situation, and they were like, well, why don't you try to do something with startups? And I was like, where do I find that? And they're like, well, there's a lot in San Francisco. And I was just like, oh, okay, well, that sounds fun enough. And so within a month, I just packed my stuff and was like, all right, I'm going to try something very daring. And then I went. So and yeah, that was the big journey to the mainland, and I haven't looked back.
Wow, that's an unusual transition, because I don't know many people in my life that would have been like, yeah, I'm just gonna pack it up and move there because I hear that there's startups there. It sounds like a really cool experience, though. In kind of transitioning or moving to San Francisco, did you have like a network of folks that would support you? Like, how did you settle into kind of the startup scene?
That was tough, and that was largely why I started off in customer support, was because I needed to have a role prior to going. Like, I wanted to interview remotely, even though if the job would be on site, I wanted to know I had some sort of income going in. But what, doing as well as I did in school, and I thought I had like, like, oh, I've got the college thing down and I'm smart, I'm capable, like people are going to want to hire me. And then I quickly learned that it's a who you know type of a situation, and it was very hard to get noticed, especially in a scene such as San Francisco where everyone's graduating from these top colleges and, you know, blah, da, 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 da. And so I learned that, I have to kind of just take what I can get to just to get my foot in somewhere. And so that was why I started off at this smaller startup, doing customer support. And I didn't really have a support system there when I moved. I moved with my partner at the time. I was kind of like, I kind of told him like, well, I'm gonna go do this thing. You can come too if you want, or you can stay here, whatever. And so he came too without, we both didn't really know anyone, and had to kind of build our friends and our network once we were there, through my job, and I made friends through that, and just meeting people just at like different types of meetups or events, in the city. But yeah, I didn't really go in having any type of support system.
That's actually something that was asked by one of the listeners a while ago, and that is, how do you actually build a network? Which was the next question I was going to ask you, right? Like, coming into an environment where you don't really know anybody, right? Like, you've maybe had some kind of intro early connections, but short of that, it's all on you. Like, you're the one that has to basically start connecting with folks and learning more about who does what and where. Were there any specific tactics that you found to be effective in kind of bootstrapping that network and finding people that can help support you and kind of help you connect to other opportunities?
Right. So I did a lot of this once I had moved to Portland, and I knew that I wanted to transition my career more towards software engineering. I quickly learned that it would be yeah, again, like a who you know, what kind of opportunities can you find through connections type of a situation. And so pretty early on into my boot camp, I decided to kind of build this network on Twitter. Like, I had never used Twitter before, really, but someone had told me like that's where all the tech people hang out, and now it's X. Rest in peace, Twitter. I don't know
Sure.
what's going
Yeah.
on. It's just a lot different now.
It's
Um,
gone. It's gone.
yeah, Twitter as we know it. So this might be totally irrelevant, but the what I did on Twitter was, initially I followed a bunch of local tech meetups to Portland, and I saw who the leaders were in those meetups, and I followed them and saw who they interacted with and would start interacting with those people. I would just basically like shove myself into conversations and meet people that way virtually. But and then also, when I would go to the meetups in person, we would already kind of have this rapport from interacting online, and that was how I built this pretty large network in Portland. And something I miss here is in Seattle, because I did a lot of that in Portland. I don't do as much of that here. But something that I did that I don't recommend it for everyone, but definitely for me it was something that was calling to me, was to make a meetup, my own meetup, because um my friend and I, who were in boot camp together, we were like going to all these tech meetups, and we noticed that they were all super dry and just not fun. um like the environment, like, yeah, it's like, okay, we'll have pizza and LaCroix. Like, it was all just very sterile, and then people give these talks, yeah, and they're just like not interesting. And coming in as a person new to tech, it was like a lot of these topics were going over our head. Like, we are like, what are they talking about? Like, why are we even here? And we're bored. So through this, we were like, hey, we should make our own meetup. And that's how I met even more people in Portland, because we had this meetup directed specifically towards people who were new to tech. So whether that's boot camp grads or new college grads, or people just self-taught and wanting to interact with other people who are new to the space, not just related to coding, but tech space as a whole, we welcome you. And so the talks that we curated, and this is actually, I saw Jason was actually one of our first speakers at our meetup, because all of our weekly or monthly meetups were directed around a different kind of topic around being new to tech. And so all of these talks that were in this specific month would be like related to interviewing, or this one would be related to, you know, what to expect in your first job, like things like that. Like we would usually have about 3 speakers for each one, and we had these little fun miniature hackathons too for people just to like learn how to collaborate. So yeah, we did that for about a year, and you know, it was really rewarding, but also very difficult.
And Jason Langstor is awesome. And Jason, if you're watching this, I'm sending you an invite to this podcast. So I know Jason probably will be checking out at some point. But yeah, it sounds like it was a very, I want to say, like a PM approach to problem solving, right? It's like you identified a problem, you figured out how to validate it, and then you came up with a solution. And you're absolutely right. A lot of the modern meetups are very dry. You're looking at a PowerPoint presentation of somebody, you know, opening VS Code for the 300th time and looking at some code snippet that is not zoomed in, and you're like, all right. So you kind of found that spot of what are people actually after and how we can help them, which is a fantastic kind of turn of events. And it sounds like it also helped you grow that community of people that you know, right?
Yeah, definitely. It kind of gave me this feeling of belonging in a way that's like I kind of created my own sense of belonging by curating this type of space, and through curating a space that had this level of inclusivity, and you know, really trying to reach out to, you know, marginalized people in tech and trying to get them, you know, to feel comfortable in our space, was something that, you know, I feel was very successful, especially in a place like Portland where it can feel a bit homogenous. We really wanted to, yeah, curate the space where, you know, the speakers are all very kind and empathetic and have this very specific tone that, you know, everyone is welcome. And I think that, you know, we had such positive feedback from our members that this was something that really positively affected them and made them feel that, you know, that we can do this, I can do this. Like you know, it's hard, but we all have a space in this landscape, which I feel is fantastic.
We all have space in this landscape. I really admire the statement, because again, we're kind of busting the early misconception that we started this with. This is, you know, there's space for everyone. That, like, whatever your skills, whatever your aspirations, whatever your background is, there's room for everyone. Like, there's no point in gatekeeping somebody behind some artificial constraint that, you know, whether you need to know somebody to get a job or whether you need to have a specific set of kind of skills that might not be applicable. I'll put it this way.
Right.
But something that you called out to is that you went through a boot camp, and boot camp can, you know, the term can be a bit controversial in certain communities, because some people say, oh, you're a boot camp, you're not a real developer because you don't have a CS degree, which also load of BS. But we'll set that aside and say, like, that from your perspective, how was the bootcamp experience? Like, how did you transition from actually starting at a boot camp, like arriving to that decision, to actually going into working as an engineer, because you work as an engineer?
You know, I feel like boot camp isn't for everyone, but I think that if you require some sort of like structured time and place, my boot camp in particular was in person, and it was like a full-time boot camp. And so that, you know, that's not available for everyone, and you know, not all people learn best like that. But for me, you know, that was a structure that I liked. And also I feel like with boot camps, it's, you know, I feel like I learned a lot of things that weren't particularly applicable to the job itself, but it was the learning how to learn, which was the particularly important lesson. And I think also like how to use Git. I don't think I would have been able to like just Google it and understand it without kind of just like having to sit in and like actually do it, and someone's like looking over my shoulder making sure like I'm doing it right. I think that concept was a little bit abstract, but yeah, I think that the biggest benefit from doing a coding bootcamp, because I didn't, you know, the things that the languages I learned, like, yeah, JavaScript in the bootcamp, I learned JavaScript and Ruby. You know, like, yeah, my job used React, but like I feel like none of the stuff I really did on day in and day out was something that transferred. It was more just like the collaboration of working with people and the how to learn aspect that was valuable for me from boot camps. And then from moving past boot camps and trying to find my next role, I realized that something that, again, network community type of based thinking, I kind of oriented myself to look at open source projects because, I didn't have any real world experience when it came to coding, but I wanted that experience of at least, going through a code review process with like actual engineers, and like how do you collaborate? How do you actually like merge and push and all these things like within like a repo that doesn't belong to me, because that was like all we did in code school. And so by doing that, it allowed me to meet more people in like open source communities and also just practice that skill of collaboration, and also like that back and forth on code reviews. That was super helpful, and I think that that was something that helped prepare me to the transition to a professional role.
Did you have any I want to say that I think, for the lack of a better word, kind of fear of contributing to open source projects? Because for folks that are new to open source that want to go on GitHub and contribute, oftentimes there is that hesitation of just like, well, like the bit of that imposter syndrome of just like, well, like there's so many people already contributing to this. I'm not sure if like me coming in and opening a pull request to fix something is really my place. Like, did you have those moments, and like how did you overcome them?
How I started off was primarily, one, looking for projects where I kind of knew that the contributors were all very, it was a kind atmosphere. Like looking for projects that have a good reputation of having kind contributors who will like pair program with you even, or like, do that kind of stuff. And so what started off for me would be to look at the issues and look for ones that were very, very small, like even non-technical, like typo type of things, like getting like documentation, or if their documentation looks spotty in one area, how can we beef it up more? I think that that was something that you know it didn't feel as scary, because it wasn't like, oh, someone's gonna judge my code. It's like simply like, oh, grammar changes, or like, this could be said better like this. And I think that that helped me ease into this world of like open source. And then from there, what I would also do would be to, based on the type of role that I was looking for. So for me, that was front end. I wanted to work with design systems, which I ended up doing. But when I was in this job hunting stage, I would go to the issues in the open source projects and particularly look for issues that I think would be good practice for me to solve, that would be related to the specific type of job that I was looking for, just so I could get that experience, versus kind of tackling these other bugs that I'm like, I'm not gonna do anything with this. I don't care about blah blah blah. I would specifically look for things that were like front end focused and were interesting to me to solve, not forcing myself to be interested in it.
I like that approach. It's very strategic in that you are actually looking for things that are relevant to you, and not just open source for the sake of open source. Because it's we all have this complaint sometimes, like during like Hacktoberfest or something, you have this like flood of people that are doing like random things. They're like, no, like let's explain how this works first, because like but you took the stage as somebody that is like, okay, I want to do front end, and I'm going to be looking for things that are front end related. And then you took an incremental approach, right? Like you starting small and then slowly moving into these bigger things. And I think that's a great strategy to avoid this kind of intimidating, oh my gosh, I got to know the code base, versus like, let me just start fiddling with like the little things. And I've seen some communities adopt like, I think it's called a good first issue. I think that's the practice, where they would flag it for somebody to come in and say, hey, if you're a new contributor, pick this up, because this is going to help you better get used to the code base, better get used to our tooling and understand how we work. And I think that's great. And I think that's a reflection of what you just described as kind of the kind communities that look at contributors as somebody that, no matter how small the contribution is, it's still valuable. So in your case, you actually took the approach of like starting small, and that is where any contribution is extremely valuable, right? Like any fix to a documentation typo is valuable. Somebody fixing a link that points to a broken page is valuable. And I think that's actually a very good avenue for folks that are new to the industry to also try and do these things. Like, yeah, it's fine. Like fixing docs is still important.
And in some cases too, what I would do would also be to go through their site, the open source whatever project site, and look for my own things to fix, and then create an issue and then solve my own issue, so that
Yeah.
it's just like, you know.
It's like the story of the engineer that like joined the company to fix an annoying bug that they had with their software
Yeah.
and then just left right away. It's like, all right, I'm done. Like
Yeah.
that's all I wanted to do.
Yeah, did conquered what I needed to, and now I'm out.
Exactly. Yeah, I just fixed my own problem. That's also a great approach. So in your career journey, did you have any specific inflection points, or that say were, for lack of a better word, I'm going to use the cliche word transformative, that you were just like, okay, this shaped me as an engineer that I am today? Like what were those?
I think that rather than thinking of it from an engineering perspective and more from a program management perspective, it would be that at my last company that I was at as an engineer, there were multiple reorgs that happened while I was there, and to the point where I had to switch teams maybe about 5 or 6 times in like a 4.5 year period.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, with all those team switches also comes manager switches. And, at times, I think that for me, it would be frustrating to have to do that from a career growth perspective, because, I'm not getting area expertise in one specific area, because I'm moving every few months to a different team and having to onboard to completely new area. And I think that, well, thinking of it from as a software engineer who wants to grow my career as a software engineer, that was really frustrating. But kind of understanding it as like a TPM, that was very valuable, because I had to learn how to work with so many different people on so many different types of problems. And I think that I realized that I do enjoy, this context switching very frequently or every few months, or having to learn things really fast. And, how do I best onboard to these topics, and can I fix it so that other people onboarding won't have to go through the same pitfalls I went through. I think the type of skills that I had to learn to survive in that period really helped shape me as a TPM, and how I approach projects, and like onboarding people to projects, and working with other people, things like that.
So it sounds like it helped you recognize after working for some time that TPM is what you actually want to do long term, based on kind of the
Yes.
experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, I had, previously, even like when I was just in code school, I had this idea that I wanted to be a product manager. And I never really kind of thought of, software engineering as the end goal. But then during my career, I learned the term about program or project managing on the technical side. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool, because I actually, I care more about the alignment and the facilitation and the getting from point A to point B, versus, what the product managers have to deal with, which is, like, why is this important? Like figuring out how to like sell it more. It's like, oh, I have to figure out, how do we successfully bring it across the line? I realized that was more of my strength and what I found myself doing day to day anyway, because we didn't have project managers to do that. And so I kind of ended up just taking on that role, and found out that there was a name for that.
I think the analogy to that comes from one of your previous talks, where you were alluding to it as kind of the difference between like the glue work and the glamour work. And yes. It's like the TPM does a bit of both, because you kind of have to be good at organizing a lot of the processes, but also the success of the product, the success of the team kind of hinges on you.
Yeah.
I like that. I like the format. Now, in terms of the mentorship aspect of your career, like one of the frequently asked questions from folks that are new or kind of mid-career in the tech industry is, how do I find people to learn from? How do you approach that question?
Previous to getting into a company, I think that, again, expanding my network was really helpful, whether it's attending live in-person meetups and just kind of like chatting with people casually, never being like up front, like, will you be my mentor? I don't think I've ever said those words to anyone. But just kind of getting to know people as people. And, I think that there is a lot to be learned from anyone in the industry, regardless of their tenure or what their role is. I think that just talking to people, it just, great start. And then from there, it's kind of like, okay, who do I click with and who do I feel like from there would be, could help guide me through some of these frustrating points in my career, especially like if they're outside of your company and they can have a objective point of view of a situation. I think that that's really helpful. So again, it could be through Slack, even Slack, what's it called? Groups are great. Twitter was good. I don't know if it still is as useful. And yeah, in-person meetups was really helpful, and I think that that's how I gained a lot of my unofficial mentors in Portland, was through doing things like that. I would say that so many people helped me there, and I'm so grateful for the community there. But that was largely because I was contributing to the community. And so it was kind of like, it was kind of like a natural push and pull of like, we're both putting things into the success of this tech community here. And so that was really helpful. I think that in terms of once you're in a company and finding mentors once you're in there, I feel like for me, it was never shying away from asking questions. I think that a lot of people new in their career would be afraid or intimidated to come off as naive or not smart enough. Which is something I definitely suffered from, and stuff, imposter syndrome, suffered and suffer from. And so I feel like, being able to kind of push that aside and, not be afraid to find people that you feel safe asking those things to, because, not everyone is a safe person to ask these questions, or, but if you find someone who's patient and, you click with, just like, don't be afraid to ask them questions, whether it's professional or about specific code question, technical question. I think that that's how I've built my, again, unofficial mentorships, where it's like, they're not my mentor, but I can go to them for advice when it comes to anything.
First of all, people that are not tolerant of you, listeners, asking questions are probably not people worth hanging out with. Because I don't know, because by that measure, I must be a very stupid person, because I ask a lot of questions.
Oh, yeah,
oftentimes.
Like, yeah.
Like, right? It's like I have not been on any team in any job where I'd be like, yeah, I know everything, like, and I will never ask any questions. Like, yeah. The second piece here that I'm actually curious to hear from you about is, you mentioned imposter syndrome, and I think that is something that even folks like late in their careers experience sometimes. How do you overcome it? Like, what's your strategy for kind of toning it down? Because I don't think it ever disappears. Like, even for like folks that I've talked to, myself, like, it pops into your mind every once in a while. It's like, all right, like, all these people are clearly smarter than me.
Again, it's about lessening it. You can't completely eradicate it, unfortunately. But I think that one thing that I have learned, and I am continuing to try and practice, is leaning into the things that I'm good at and I know that I enjoy doing. And that's why this whole career kind of pivot happened in the first place. Because I realized, like, doing the type of work that is required for software engineering was kind of pushing me into this hole of imposter syndrome. And it was getting to a point where I was like, there isn't a specific thing here in this particular role where I'm like, I really, really enjoy doing this. I really, really enjoy doing that. And, I realized that what I did enjoy was more of the organizational project managing type of aspect. And from there, it was like, okay, well, lean into that. And I realized that leaning into that at my last role, even as a software engineer, really upped my confidence. It allowed me to feel like I could speak more with expertise, because I knew that this was an area that, not all software engineers are good at. And it made me feel like, it gave me some sort of authority to feel like, okay, well, I am the authority here. Like, I am the best one in the room at this particular thing. And I think that feeling allowed me to feel more like I deserved to be at this table, which, is sad that, we don't always feel like that. But, it definitely helped reduce that feeling of what am I here? Like there's so many smart people here doing a job a bajillion times better than me. Like why am I here? What's my purpose? I think finding those things that's like, I'm good at this and I'm gonna lean into it and do more of it really helped. And I think that especially if you have imposter syndrome and you're dealing with these types of feelings, talking to your manager about it is great, and see where can they help push you in terms of leaning into these specific interests that you have.
It's finding your own personal source of power. It's like, what's that kind
Yeah,
of the
exactly.
thing that you're really, really good at?
Exactly.
Wonderful advice for our listeners to take to heart. And speaking of advice, there's one question that I ask of all my guests at the end of the episode, and that is, if you look back on your career, if you look back at all the work that you've done, for somebody that's listening to this, somebody that is junior in their career, mid-career, or even late in their career, if there would be one piece of unconventional advice that you would give them from your experience, what would it be? And it can be unconventional in your own view. Like it doesn't need to be something that is,
I think that there's something that I'm trying to still, tell myself and perfect, and I'm not good at this by any means. But that would be to not take feedback personally. Because I'm a very sensitive person, and I put a lot into the work that I do, and so I'm a perfectionist in that way. And so even if it's like a nice little like, oh, could you try this or do that, then I'm like, oh no, I did it wrong, like I am a bad person and I am gonna get fired. I think that this is something that I'm still trying to work on when it comes to like receiving those comments. I think that a lot of times the word feedback has like a negative connotation to it, and it doesn't always have to be. I think that people that don't know how to, or like managers who don't know how to deliver feedback well, then that's when it comes across as the feedback, right? Versus kind of like reorienting or helping people pivot this direction in a way that is kind, and not accusatory, if that makes sense. So managers, if you're listening, then that's the advice for you. That's but if you are the one who is receiving the feedback, I think that practicing your feeling of self-worth outside of your job, and knowing that even if you make mistakes or have hiccups at work, that doesn't reflect on your capability or you as a person.
everybody makes mistakes. I mean, we're all
Everybody makes
human.
mistakes.
Everybody makes it all the time. And it's more like what we learn from them.
Yes, yeah.
Wonderful way to wrap up the show. Katie, for folks that want to learn more about the work that you're doing, things you're building, where should they go?
Well, I mean, I've been dogging on X/Twitter this whole time, but to keep in touch, you can go to Katie Fujihara, or at Katie Fujihara on Twitter. That's where I wasn't active, but now I'm kind of trying to get active again. Not really posting as many tech things, but we're hanging out in tech Twitter, X, whatever. So come
I'm
on
still calling
by.
it Twitter. I cannot call it X. It's Twitter. It is Twitter.
It's Twitter with
it
like
just does
a
not
ugly
roll
logo.
Like, yeah, like what's the like? Okay, fine. If it's not Twitter, like, what's a tweet then?
I know.
I don't know. An X? Like, I don't know. And yeah, Katie, it's been great chatting with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.